3, 2, 1.
Research. Innovate.
Educate. This is RTP. This is RTP180.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your house for RTP180 for June 2021. I'm your MC Wade Minter and welcoming you to Ecology for our topic today. RTP180, the region's longest running talk series, and we're glad to have you online wherever you are. In fact, to make sure everyone knows how to use the chat function in Zoom, be sure your chat function is set to panelists and attendees. Please type into chat where you are currently geographically watching us from. Inevitably waiting for the response of my couch. All right, we got South Durham from Pete. Very nice. Durham, Chapel Hill, Durham, Bull City is well represented here. Southport, awesome, all the way from the coast. West Raleigh, North Raleigh, directional Raleigh, Durham. Also South Durham. Durham on the Eno, Currituck. We got a couple folks from the coast. Hopefully you're vacationing. The all-American city, Morrisville, home of Weight Competition Center, where I play hockey. Jake Holter's in a van down by the river giving motivational speeches. North Raleigh, Durham. Awesome. The Triangle is well represented here tonight. We are streaming live on Zoom and Facebook Live, all thanks to our presenting sponsor, RTI International, who's been making this happen for quite a while. Also, our live broadcast sponsor, Dual Boot Partners. They're making sure that we can come to you when you can't come to us. I think that's how that works. What's going to happen here is we have 5 speakers tonight. They will be speaking for 5 minutes each. At the end of that time, we'll have about 5 minutes of Q&A coming from you, the audience, in Zoom chat, in Facebook Live chat, using the Q&A feature. Stopping by my house. Please don't stop by my house because I'm at the frontier, as far as you know. Also, if you want to connect with us socially during the show, tweet at FrontierRTP or use the hashtag RTP180 on Twitter. We are way too online, and we will see that as well. Now, guess what? A lot of us have shots. That means you can come back into the Frontier, which is the region's only free, pause for dramatic effect, co-working facility. That's right. If you're in the heart of RTP or at the very least the Duodenum, stop by the Frontier, pull up a desk. It is a resource here for you. We also are going to be doing stuff outside. If you have not seen the Box Yard, first of all, go see the Box Yard. We're going to be having a Triangle pop-up market there, 11 to 3 on June 19th. Also, Wednesdays through Sundays, you can enjoy BU Cafe, Medicine Mama's Pharmacy, Buzzy Bakes, Lawrence Barbecue, free live event. It is a very fun spot to check out in the middle of the Triangle. I highly encourage you to check out this pop-up market or just go anytime you're in town. So that's what we got. Hopefully all of you are ready for Q&A. If you have a question during the course of one of our presenters' conversations, please go ahead and put that in chat. I know typing things out, especially if you're on a phone, can take a little while. We'd love for the Q&A session to start with your questions. So if you have a question pop into your head in the first minute or so of someone's talk, please go ahead and add it. I will not be offended. In fact, I will probably thank you. Excellent. Cool. I'm talking to a screen. That's kind of weird. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our first speaker of the evening. He's a scientist at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and a professor at NC State. Please welcome Dr. Roland Kays.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for the invitation. Today, I'm going to talk about the Internet of Animals. Only the Internet of Animals doesn't actually exist. So go ahead and click to the next slide. If you pay attention and help me with some ideas of what you think the Internet of Animals could be, then you, like Al Gore, can claim some credit for inventing the Internet of Animals. So I want to go ahead and start this with an example of what the Internet of Animals might be with the white stork. The stork, next slide here, we'll see some storks, is a species that breeds in Europe. It's kind of the iconic, right? The animal that brings the babies. They breed all over Europe. They're very common there. very loved by the Europeans, but they don't only live in Europe. They actually fly on down south for migration. So go ahead and click on to the next one. There's a stork flying, and to the animation. We know a lot actually about what these storks do because we're able to study them with GPS tracking tags. And so this is real data that you're seeing here, showing real storks flying south for the winter, basically. These amazing journeys where they actually go all the way across the Sahara, which is incredibly dangerous. And along the way, of course, they're stopping and they're going to be interacting with other species. And we have real tracking data from those species like wildebeest in East Africa. And so there's these amazing interactions that are happening, and we can document this with modern technology. Now, some of these storks go all the way to South Africa, which is a pretty incredible journey. And of course, down there, they're going to be interacting with other species like elephants or African buffalo. And the amazing thing that this data shows you, this animation shows you, is just how rich this information is, how much these animals really connect our planet as they fly around. But also that we're actually getting this data in real time, live, every day. It's coming to us either through satellite networks or from phone networks. This comes from the MoveBank website. So if we click to the next slide, you can see how we do this is we set up this MoveBank database for animal trackers to use. And data comes in on 7 different communication networks. Sometimes it's satellite, sometimes it's a GSM phone network, and it streams into MoveBank. Each scientist controls access to the data. So sometimes you don't want to make it public, but sometimes you do. And if you do, you can check it out on the Animal Tracker app. So you can get the Animal Tracker app and actually see some live data. And here at the museum, we're actually about to tag some grackles that we'll probably put up live. And we have some other animals that you can track live. And these data become available for the scientists to use. We also have an API, so fancy computer scientists can access the data as well. And at some point, some journalist was like, oh, this must be the Internet of Animals. And we're like, oh, well, what's that? I don't know. Maybe it is. You know, what is the Internet of Animals? So the next obvious thing, the next slide will show is, well, there's the Internet of Things, right? Which is this idea that like all our devices are connected, they're all communicating. But I think we need to go actually back a step further and think about what actually is the Internet. So the next slide will show, right? It's basically a network of networks. We've got all these public, private, academic networks, and these are connected in really intelligent ways, right? They're connected in meaningful ways. And so the next slide will show that we have a lot of animals on the internet. We have MoveBank, we have Wildlife Insights, we have iNaturalist, all these different databases. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't, but they all have information about animals. But I don't think this necessarily is the Internet of Animals because they don't necessarily have meaningful connections. And many of them don't have this sort of real-time insight, which is what we expect of the internet, right? We expect the internet to have live information, what's happening right now. And we have that sometimes, but a lot of times we don't. And so the next slide will show kind of what I think is the starting point for a definition of maybe what the Internet of Animals is, which would be a network of meaningful connections between digital animal information, including real-time data streams that will provide new insight and products useful for humans, animals, and the planet. So what that might look like here, if we take our diagram of our MoveBank setup, and this is actually what we're building and what we have working right now, is connections between the animal tracking data in MoveBank with NASA data about the landscape, about the weather, about the storms that are coming. And then you can't just plot those on top of each other. You need some analytics. So we have an analytics platform that runs our programming language in the background that will automatically run these types of calculations and give you real-time insights. Maybe, you know, how's this pending storm affecting the flight of your stork? Or you can imagine probably 1,000 other things that you could do with that kind of information. So this is an example of how we I think are moving in that direction. We didn't say, oh, well, let's invent the Internet of Animals. We said, hey, we want to have real-time insights about how our animals are interacting with the environment. And so we created the system. But it's more than that too, as the next slide will show. I think there's more. You know, animal tracking could help us for migration routes, disease spread. Everyone, of course, is super interested now in disease spread that come from a lot, you know, 60% of the diseases that humans have come from animals. Animals are moving around. How is this interaction going to happen? Habitat colonization. Was that a bell? I think I heard a bell. Okay. But we also have camera traps, we have acoustic sensors, we have citizen science. Next slide we also, I think if we had artificial intelligence, we could do even more, right? Imagine all the sensors on these electric cars driving around that could be detecting deer or detecting other wildlife, or the security cameras in your backyard. I don't need the photograph of the coyote that ran through your backyard, but I would like to know that there was one there, right? So the AI could say, yes, there was a coyote there. I don't need to sort of see all your pictures, but to have that information could really help understand some of what we're going to hear later today about human wildlife interactions. And who knows what else we could do for conservation, for sustainable management of hunting, emerging diseases, pets, livestock. The final slide, which kind of maybe trigger some of your questions. Help me invent the Internet of Animals. What should it be? Share your ideas, and you can stake your claim as a co-inventor of the Internet of Animals. So thanks a lot, and bring on the questions.
All right, big thanks to Dr. Roland Kayes. Questions from you, the audience, coming to us in Zoom chat, coming to us in Facebook chat. First question comes from Jay Coulter. Are migratory routes changing as global climate change happens?
Yeah, good question. As far as we know, the major routes have not shifted because we still have, although things are getting a little bit warmer and things are changing a little bit, we still have the things that are driving the migration routes are generally like the bodies of water, right? The Mississippi River is still there. And so animals are still flying up and down the Mississippi River. The major thing that's changing is the timing of that. And so the animals want to arrive at their breeding grounds at the right time, when things are green, when the insects are out if they're eating insects, or when the plants are green if they're eating plants. And so they need to shift that timing. And some species are shifting, and some species seem to not be shifting. So they're arriving too late, and they've kind of missed the surplus. Hopefully they will adapt over time, but it's more the timing than the direction so far.
Follow-up question also from Jay Coulter. What is a website people can go to in order to find this data or see some of these migratory animations?
Yeah, so movebank.org has the animation that I showed you right there on front, and you can explore a lot of data there. Also, the Animal Tracker app is a little bit more of a user-friendly way to look at tracking data on your phone. And you can also follow animals. So there's a lot of those animals that are sending out live data. It depends from one sort of month to the next. There's different animals that might be on there. I know we've got some great blue herons in the Charlotte area right now that are hanging around a lake. We had a bald eagle that we were following for a long time, and he just recently disappeared. So we don't know really what happened to him. We're afraid he might have died, or his tag might have fallen off. We're not quite sure about that one. But those are the two best ways, the Animal Tracker app or movebank.org.
Let's not pump up their egos too much. They're good blue herons at best.
Oh, they're great. Come on. Have you ever spent time with a great blue heron and seen their bills up close? They're pretty great.
I've seen my Amazon bills. I assume that they're fairly similar. Question from Gray coming to us from Zoom chat. How are you thinking about integrating and managing sensor data from people's homes with regards to privacy?
Well, that's a good question. And that's where I think AI comes in to be important, right? So AI can identify on the camera what the picture is of, and then only send us the information that the user is comfortable with sending. So I don't need the photographs. I don't need any photographs, right? I certainly don't need the photographs of people. And I probably don't even need the data of people. I mean, if you want to record that, oh, there was a person, there was a person, there was a person, there was a person, that might be useful. But mostly I want to know, when does the coyote show up and how often? And what about the fox? And what about the possum? And what about the deer and the raccoons and those different species? Because that's the information that'll help us monitor wildlife populations. And, you know, I would think it'll be up to you to share that, right? You might decide that you don't want me to know that a possum is in your yard 5 times a night, but maybe you don't care. And maybe that's actually interesting. And in fact, actually, I hadn't sort of thought this through, but possums are amazing tick killers and can actually reduce the tick level, we think, maybe in your yard. So maybe lots of possums are a good thing.
All right. And our last question is coming from Eric here in Zoom chat. If you think about the Internet of Animals, what about tracking humans via cell phones and warning them when they're in a sensitive area so they can avoid potentially protected animals?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So there certainly is a lot of tracking of people via cell phones to a variety of resolutions and by a variety of different groups. I think we don't have that many animals tracked, but I think the idea that's mentioned there, where it could really come into fruition, that I think would be exciting, would be with car technology, especially when you think about the self-driving cars and the technology that's associated with that. They can tell, right, if as they're driving, if there's a deer on the side of the road, they can see that. The car can see that. And if it's taught through AI to recognize that there's a deer there, that first of all, we could register that, we could share that with the database, and we could say, okay, this is a place that has a lot of deer. But you could also imagine that these cars could talk to each other, and they could warn the car behind them, hey, look out, there's the deer here, maybe slow down a little bit so this deer doesn't run in front of you. So I think it's I mean, the amount of animals that get killed on the road is tremendous, and it's bad for the animal populations, it's bad for the human populations, it's bad for our vehicles. And I think, some of this sort of Internet of Animals, the types of things that you could do with the Internet of Animals could potentially reduce that.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, lots of knowledge about the Internet of Animals. Big hand of wherever you happen to be for Dr. Roland K.
Great, thanks everybody. This was very fun.
All right, keep those questions coming and going. People may, if you have questions that weren't answered, you may be able to get those answered in Zoom chat, depending on how things go. But now it's time for our next speaker of the evening. She's a research scientist at the EPA. Please welcome Annie Neale.
Thank you, Wade. Good evening, everybody. I am excited to be here, and I hope you are too. And so thank you for being here on this beautiful evening. As Wade mentioned, I'm a research scientist at EPA here in RTP. So let's go to the next slide, Amanda, please. Great. So let's start out by talking about all of the things that we get from nature. So sometimes we refer to these things as ecosystem goods and services. And in fact, Roland mentioned a fantastic ecosystem service provided by possums and their huge appetite for ticks, which in my mind is a huge service. So these ecosystem goods and services, they really loosely fall into one of these 7 categories of benefits. Can you go back, Amanda? Thank you. Not sure what happened there, but so they fall into one of these 7 general benefit categories. And of course, in reality, all of these benefit categories are connected in a massive web. So let's think for a moment about the water that comes out of your faucet. How many miles did it travel? What did the landscape look like that it either traveled over or perhaps under? How many years did it take to get there? Did it pass through any factories? Or, oh my goodness, did it pass through a sewage treatment facility? Or was it purified by a filter consisting of lush riparian vegetation before it made it to a water treatment facility or to your well? Or let's think about the conservation of biodiversity and why that is just so incredibly important to us, sometimes in ways that we don't even really acknowledge. So many of us really enjoy viewing wildlife. We sometimes travel great distances so that our kids can be thrilled by seeing animals in the wild, or maybe we enjoy fishing or hunting, or perhaps it just makes us really happy to know that giraffes exist somewhere in the world. And what about our food sources? So scientists have estimated that every 3rd bite of food that we eat is reliant on a pollinator. So what would happen if we lost our pollinator species? Or what about the medicines that we take? Many of those are at least initially sourced from nature. Some estimates say that about 70% of the medicines that have been developed in the last 25 years come from nature. Or what about that flood that didn't happen in your neighborhood because perhaps of local wetlands or green space that helped prevent it? So when we're talking about ecosystem goods and services and my 7 buckets of benefits, I like to think of them as, this is what we're talking about. So next slide, please, Amanda. So now let's talk about EnviroAtlas. EnviroAtlas is a tool that was developed by EPA and also a lot of our partners. It's an online resource that provides just a wealth of geospatial data, easy to use tools, and other resources, and they're all related to the multitude of ecosystem services that we get from nature. So it includes hundreds of data layers. It includes environmental as well as demographic data layers. And sorry, can you go back to the next slide? Oh, sorry. Okay, no, that's fine. Sorry about that. It also, it can be used by anybody with an internet connection. So it can be used by decision makers. It is used by decision makers as well as other researchers, and it's used widely as an education tool. So it includes an interactive mapping application, and there's a graphic there that shows the interface that makes it very easy for people to discover and visualize these data layers. It includes analytic and interpretive tools, and it includes downloadable GIS toolboxes, and it includes many guides, tutorials, fact sheets, examples of how people are using the data in a decision context, and it includes educational lesson plans. So as I said, it's used widely in the as an education tool. It also includes this really cool eco-health relationship browser. And this is a fun to use front end on an extensive literature review, investigating all the linkages, all the many linkages between ecosystems and actually human health outcomes. So a user can start with either a health outcome or an ecosystem or a specific ecosystem service, and can read a short description describing that linkage, and then can be sent to the literature that supports that relationship. Next slide, please. So the data have been developed at two primary extents. There's data available that span the entire nation. A lot of this is based on 30-meter land cover data. So we have a data point for every 30 square meters on the ground. It's consistent data for the US, and there's a few examples there. So number of climate vulnerable bird species, population density at a 30-meter pixel. So that means for every one of these data layers, there's about 9 billion data points in that underlying data. And then we have very fine community data for select communities across the US, including Durham, by the way, and Hillsborough and Chapel Hill. And the fine scale data cover about 65 million people. And for these communities, we started with a 1 meter land cover classification. So we know what the land cover is for every square meter on the ground, which is pretty finely resolved. And I think that is it. And it looks like if you could go, yes, so thank you. So if you have any questions, if you look at EnviroAtlas and you want to ask us anything about it after this presentation, there's linkages there for the website as well as our EnviroAtlas email address. So thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big virtual hand for Annie and Neale. Annie? Oh, I looked at the wrong label. Good times. That's on me. So, ladies and gentlemen, please get your questions in if you have questions about the EnviroAtlas and the research that Annie's doing. First question is coming in from social media from Kate. The EPA is apparently collecting a lot of data here. What are ways that the average person can use that data to improve their lives?
So there's so many different ways that the average person, so you could look at, the first thing a lot of people do is they go to their home address and they look at what is around them. So just understanding your local neighborhood can go a long way to perhaps being an influencer and getting involved in local decision making. So perhaps you would be interested in the number of regulated facilities, or in the air quality, or local parks, or maybe there's an environmental justice issue that you could uncover by looking at these data layers in the context of the demographic variables that are also available. So lots of ways of using it in the community.
All right, next question is coming in from Brock on social media. What is a research project that the EPA has going on that people might be surprised to learn is happening in the EPA?
Boy, that is a great question. There is a lot of research going on in EPA. I would say that one research project that I'm familiar with, that people might be surprised by, is we are looking at using anonymized and aggregated information from cell phones, which go a long way to understanding patterns of human mobility and interacting with their local communities, and especially with parks. We're doing a ton of research looking at the fate and transport of chemicals like PFAS. So there's lots of exciting research going on at EPA. It's a great question.
Right. And we thank you for bringing your perspective here to RTP 180. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Annie Neale.
Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, the show keeps rolling right along because it is now time to meet our next speaker of the evening. He's the co-founder of Gusto Global and a data scientist. Please welcome Dr. Chris Henry.
All right, thank you for that introduction and for having me speak at this event here today. And hello, everyone. I'll be talking to you about Gusto Global. So the Gusto Global is, next slide. Gusto Global is a startup company started in North Carolina. And the goal of the company is to rationally design live biotherapeutic drugs to treat human disease and improve human health. And when I talk about live biotherapeutic drugs, you can think of a probiotic, but more of a pharmaceutical probiotic that a doctor might ultimately prescribe rather than the one you might buy in the milk section of the store. Next slide. So the ecology is at the center of everything Gusto does, but not the kind of ecology that you're going to hear about in the other talks here today, because they're really talking about what I call macroecology, ecology that we can see with our eyes. Animals interacting, insects interacting with each other in the environment, interacting with humans, and how to manage those interactions and how to see and sense and detect those interactions. We're doing the same thing, but we're focused on a microscopic scale on bacteria in your gut. The bacteria that form the human microbiome. So the human microbiome you can think of as an organ in your body, because that's what it is. But it's an organ that's not comprised of human cells, but it's comprised of bacterial cells. And in fact, there are more bacteria living on a human body than there are human cells. So we're actually all mostly bacteria, as much as we may not like to hear that. We don't want to wash it off. That's actually a good thing. It's a positive thing. Bacteria have a lot to do with the way we metabolize our food. They have a lot to do with how our immune system is modulated and controlling our immune system, to the extent that there's evidence emerging that microbiome has an impact, a role to play in why certain patients respond negatively, particularly younger patients, negatively to COVID. So it has a massive role to play in our immune systems. It even affects our thoughts and feelings. There are neurotransmitters in our brain that cannot be synthesized by human cells alone. They can certain chemical steps that synthesize those molecules have to happen in the gut, the bacteria in our gut. And so we don't think of it, but they're actually an enormous part of our health. Next slide. So of course, given that we know this, controlling the microbiome and understanding the microbiome can have a huge role to play in treating disease, predicting response to drugs, and ultimately being happier, healthier humans. Next slide. So today, microbiome drugs are starting to emerge, like actual pharmaceutical microbiome-based drugs. Seres Therapeutics just completed a phase 3 trial. Rebiotics unveiled a drug for treating C. diff. In fact, there's been several drugs to treat C. diff. They're using microbiome to treat ulcerative colitis, atopic dermatitis, and even exploring microbiome therapy to treat symptoms of autism. Next slide. Microbiome has a huge role to play in our metabolism, how we metabolize our food, and thus how we metabolize drugs. And there's lots of articles here, but the story I always like to tell is a chemotherapy drug that 25% of patients, was a very effective drug for treating cancers. Doctors desperately wanted to treat their patients with this drug, but 25% of patients had a very negative reaction to it. And what they ultimately found is that the microbiome of these 25% of patients shared common properties. And they ultimately found that in these 25% of patients, their bodies were metabolizing the drug, which is what's supposed to happen, and the drugs leave your system because these drugs are toxic. But then their microbiome in these 25% of patients was recycling the drug back into the bodies of these patients, and so they were never getting rid of the drug. And of course, chemotherapy drugs are toxic, and that would be a bad thing. They were actually able to give these patients a probiotic or do other things to modulate their microbiome to help them be able to be treated by this drug. So it's just one of a powerful example of this. Next slide. And of course, microbiome can ultimately, we think, lead to healthier, happier humans. There's implications in obesity. We could treat obesity by managing the microbiome, improve our response to certain diets. They've even used the microbiome and improve our response to aging to the extent that they've used the microbiome to predict how long someone will live. Now, I would say this is not causative. This is the microbiome serving as a readout of how healthy your lifestyle is. So much as they can probably do the same thing with your liver cells, they can probably predict how long you can live by looking at your liver. But the point is that there's a connection. And so we can definitely have an influence on human health by managing the microbiome. Next slide. So all of this comes down to understanding the ecology, and that's what Gusto does. We look at the microbiome, we study it in a very deep way. We sequence the DNA of the microbiome. We make that, we combine that DNA into bacterial genomes. We build models of those genomes, and we use those models to predict how the bacteria will interact with one another and how to control and manage those interactions, and how the bacteria will interact with the human host and how to control and manage those interactions. So much as you've heard the other speakers here talk about the same thing with animals and insects and humans, we're doing that. We're studying how to do that in the gut. Next slide. So we have a great team for doing this. We have Neale Vanderlilly and Safia Tagavi who run the microbiology. So there's an experimental wing to this where we synthesize the bacteria and we study how they behave and we validate our models. And then I run the bioinformatics and computational modeling, where we actually build and run our models to predict activity. And ultimately the goal, we are not engineering bacteria in your gut. We're taking naturally occurring human microbiota, putting them together in new ways to have a positive effect on disease and on human health, as much as you might get from eating a yogurt or a kefir product in the store. Next slide. So we're very excited to report how, so all of our work gets integrated into a technology stack that makes all this possible and ultimately culminates in the next slide. We recently published a paper in Nature Communications where we've actually used this platform in Gusto Global to rationally design a microbiome product that was successfully used to treat colitis in mice. So we actually not only treat mice with colitis and help them to recover from colitis, but actually mice with our product were resistant to getting colitis in the first place. So it has both a defensive and a treatment-based effect. So we're very excited about this. There's a long way to go to get to human trials, but this is actually the very first defined rationally designed microbiome product out there. And so I think the implications for human health long term for these kinds of products is very, very enormous. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Henry, talking about the microbiome and all of its wonderful uses. First question comes to us from Jay Coulter in Zoom chat. Do you think that the recent increase in hand sanitizer is negatively impacting our human microbiome by killing beneficial bacteria?
Yes. Yeah, it's not good. They say that in the hospital, they've actually done studies in hospitals where, and of course, it's good that hospitals are increasingly sanitary, but it's also giving rise to the increasing resistance, the increasing growth of antibiotic resistant strains. And that if we had more bacterial competition in hospitals, it would reduce that. And so it's not to say that hospitals should be dirty places or unsanitary, but our current strategies are to wipe out all bacteria, and that all bacteria are bad. And that's ultimately, we need to evolve to a strategy where we do targeting the bad bacteria and leave the good bacteria there.
All right. Question coming from Zoom chat from Eric. He notes that our microbiome is in continual communication with the larger ecology of the world. How can we increase the appreciation that everyone understands that what we do to the planet, we ultimately reflect back onto ourselves?
Yeah, I'm, in addition to being a co-founder of Gusto, I also work for the Department of Energy at Argonne National Lab. So I study environmental microbiota using the same concepts and principles. So this is absolutely true. Everything we do to the planet, just like we have a microbiome organ in our bodies that enhances our health, the planet has a microbiome organ that increases the health of the planet. And climate change is affecting that. And so that's why you see algal blooms having a toxic effect that ruins the ecology of the environments where they occur. And so we need to understand that all life is connected at a deep mechanistic level everywhere. We acquire bacteria from the environment into our own microbiomes. And so all life is connected. So as Star Wars-like as that sounds, it's absolutely true.
All right, last question coming to us from Gray in Zoom chat. Do you envision a future in which food or other consumables have labels with a microbiome score indicating whether or not this particular item is good or bad for your microbiome?
I see that happening, but I also see the more we understand the microbiome, I see that a microbiome aisle in the grocery store with microbiome probiotics, not just pharmaceutical probiotics, but consumable probiotics, which you have a very limited set of options now, but actually scientifically designed consumer probiotics to address depression, help you concentrate. So, all these things, if we understand the microbiome fully, they have a huge effect on how we feel, and, an alternative to caffeine to keep you awake and alert. So that I think that I see the applications of this growing a lot.
All right, we can look for a future where Starbucks serves things for your microbiome. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Dr. Chris Henry. The microbiome and you. A love story. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to our fourth speaker of the evening. She's a fourth-generation beekeeper, a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30, and the founder and CEO of Bee Downtown. Please welcome Leigh-Kathryn Bonner.
Hey, everybody. All right, so the world's leading companies follow the bees. Next slide. My name's Leigh-Kathryn Bonner, and I am the founder and CEO of a business, or beesness, as we like to call it, called Bee Downtown. Next slide. I am a fourth-generation beekeeper. I come from a long line of North Carolinians, and I started Bee Downtown my junior year at NC State University. Next slide. At Bee Downtown, we install and maintain beehives on corporate campuses to help rebuild sustainable honeybee populations while simultaneously providing year-round employee engagement and leader development programming to our partners. Fun fact, RTP Frontier was actually one of the very first companies to sign on with Bee Downtown almost 6 years ago today. Next slide. And while we have the Corporate High program that is definitely buzzing with excitement across the Southeast, we have the BDT Leadership Institute as well. And it goes one step further than that employee engagement piece and moves to employee development. Next slide. So the BDTLI is based in a field of study known as biomimicry. Biomimicry is an approach to innovation that seeks sustainable solutions to human challenges by emulating nature's time-tested patterns and strategies. You might be thinking, that sounds super cool. However, I've never heard of this before and I want to learn more. I've never experienced it yet either. The next slide. However, if you have flown in an airplane, probably none of us have flown in that airplane, but in pretty much every airplane, they are designed, the wings are tapered, the aerodynamics have been designed, even the beak shapes of certain airplanes, the noses have been designed to look like birds and to be able to have the design structure of birds' wings and body shapes to help airplanes fly. So if you have flown on a Delta airplane, a Southwest airplane, any of the above, I know most of us haven't done it in the last year or so, but biomimicry is everywhere we look. Next slide. However, at Be Downtown, we do it a little bit different. Biomimicry is typically done in design, but with the bees are one of Mother Nature's most incredible and best examples of a super social, highly efficient and effective species. From the bees, we can learn so much about what it means to be a highly effective team, a high-performing team, as well as effective leaders. So since I only have 5 minutes, we're only going to go over one hive mind lesson for today. Next slide. And we're going to talk about getting it right over getting along. We see in businesses all the time, on teams all the time, everybody's scared to be the person that in their mind they think stirs the pot. People want to make sure that everyone is getting along on their team, but sometimes that can be a hindrance on getting it right. So in these two pictures, the one in the middle, the one on the far right, what you're looking at is a swarm of bees. A swarm of bees happens when a colony gets too big. The colony decides, okay, we're going to split from one colony into two. Half the colony flies off with the original leader. That leader takes the most dangerous job to fly off with those bees. They no longer have a place to live. So special bees are sent out called scout bees. Those bees go out and they fly all over a 5 to 7 mile radius. They each come back with a different idea of what the perfect forever home looks like for this colony to fly off together as a unit. So these bees come in and they're dancing different dances. All the scout bees have different ideas. There's a couple bees, and researchers have put trackers on bees and figured out, yeah, these are probably the top 3 locations for the best chance of success for the colony. And there's a couple bees that are like, I promise I'm super passionate about this. I know I've got a good spot. I'm not going to let us go anywhere else. So as another bee is dancing a different dance, this bee doesn't stop, but she actually starts to butt heads with the other bee. And she convinces the other bee to not continue dancing her dance, but to stop and watch the bee continue dancing hers. And they don't just watch, but they learn the dance as well. And so over time, you start with all these bees dancing different dances, but within a period of 3 hours to 3 days, these bees, all the scout bees, come to a consensus, and a beekeeper can look, and as soon as they all start dancing the same way, the beekeeper can look and say, okay, this swarm is about to fly off to its forever home. And in businesses, what we often look at are those as difficult or hard conversations to have, where you feel like you're butting heads. And in the next slide, what we'll talk about is what our Chief Learning Officer has coined as courageous conversations, where if we can take away that stigma of something being negative, of, oh, I'm stirring the pot, or, oh, I just want my team to get along, I just want my family to get along, and avoiding these hard or difficult conversations, if you just change that framework to a courageous conversation where you understand that as the deliverer of that news or of that feedback, it takes courage to be able to do that, to be able to say, okay, let's have this conversation. You also realize that it takes courage for the recipient of that information as well to come forward and say, I hear you, I understand, and okay, let's move forward in a different, potentially different way. Courageous conversations are super important in the business world. They're important for leaders to remember and encourage their team to have as well, because getting along does not necessarily propel a business forward. You may think that it does, but in the long run, it's getting it right that propels the business forward. And you can do that in a positive way. And the next slide. And leadership, it is hard and it is inconvenient. Being a bee is hard and it's inconvenient. But one of the things that I've learned over my time as a leader is that vulnerability builds trust. Trust builds relationships, and relationships build businesses. My hope is that next time you have to come forward and have a courageous conversation with someone, that you have to get it right over getting along, that you remember the bees and you remember that that's okay and that's productive, and that's how you all get to the place you want to go. Thank you.
All right, some bee wisdom there from Leigh-Kathryn Bonner. We're now open for your questions. First question comes from Eric in Zoom chat. How do you try to educate people who are not participating in the Bee Downtown program to not kill the bees, to let them do their thing?
Yes, so we love all the pollinators, not just the honeybees, all the pollinators. What we tell people is everything a honeybee touches or a bee touches, they're trying to leave better than how they found it. If a bee lands on you, don't be scared, don't swat at them. Just think about the fact that you were so sweet that the bee, for just a second, thought that you might be a flower. It's important that we all take care of the bees and the pollinators, not just the beekeepers, because it takes everyone working together for the collective good and for the collective change to happen.
All right, question coming in from Larry on social media. Is there ever a time during that swarming behavior you were describing where the bees can't come to a consensus, and what happens then?
So you can have a point in time where the bees don't find a place that they feel like is the best, and they will stay at the location that they swarmed to. Very rarely, though, does that happen. They typically will pick one of the top 3 locations from the scout bees. One of those 3 locations is where the bees are going to go. It can take longer at times than at other times. I've gotten a call before for a swarm, and they said it just landed in the tree, literally like as they were calling me. By the time I got there in 15 minutes, got my stuff on, got a ladder, so it was about an hour in. They had already taken off. So it can be really fast that they find their forever home as well. We hope that we can get them and bring them back into a box so that we can keep those good genetics, because they are freebies and they're great genetics. So we'd love to keep them at Bee Downtown. But if another beekeeper snags them, they get really great genetics from the Bee Downtown bees.
Question from Raquel in Zoom chat. Do you have any programs for people who are very afraid of bees?
That's a great question. Yes, we have Honey Camp where your team can come in, sign up, and get to basically do a sommelier class for tasting monofloral honeys, which is super fun. We also have a DIY pollinator bee hotel class, as well as a planting for pollinators. So how can you plant native plants? It's very much based off of Debbie Roos and her 25 native plant pollinators for North Carolina. So we talk a lot about the importance of native plants. So you don't have to be a beekeeper to support the bees and to support a sustainable ecosystem. We actually prefer that people help in regards to providing food and habitat for all the native pollinators than become a beekeeper.
All right, last questions coming in from Mark in Zoom chat. Do we know how these bees decide on the best alternatives? Do the dances describe the site or express a quality? Like how do we know what they're communicating?
Yes, so the dance is called a waggle dance, and it's a figure 8. How fast and how long the bees vibrate their bodies across the figure 8, the bees watching are calculating for every second 0.6 of a mile. So they're figuring out almost to the foot how far away that new home is. They do this for foraging for flowers and food too. And then the angle that they make the 8 in regards to, let's say this is the top, the angle they make the 8 is the angle of the location from the sun. So they're actually doing math in their heads as they're watching these dances, and they're learning, okay, if it's straight up, that means you're going directly towards the sun. If it's 45 degrees, you're actually going to fly out. You're going to go 45 degrees to the right, and you're going to go, 15,000 feet to on a 45-degree angle, and you're going to get to your forever home. So they have the second most complex language of communication besides mammals. They're absolutely fascinating. I would be a bad bee because I'm terrible at math.
I can respect that. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Leigh-Kathryn Bonner.
Thank you, everybody.
Lots of great questions. We didn't get to a couple of them. Leigh-Kathryn may answer those in Zoom chat, but thank you for your questions. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our final speaker of the evening. She's worked as a wildlife researcher, manager, and educator across the U.S. and currently specializes in human-wildlife interactions in North Carolina. Please welcome Falyn Owens.
Hey everybody, happy to be here. I am so excited to be the last person to speak because the other speakers have really set up my presentation really well. So hopefully I'll be able to finish us off with a great note. The very first point that I want to make is that nature is literally everywhere. Next slide. There we go. Just hit this home. Nature is literally everywhere. It is in us and on us and all around us. It's part of us and we are a part of it all the time. It is inescapable. This may seem like a fanciful kumbaya perspective, but if you don't believe me, in 2018, our very own Rob Dunn of NC State published a book about how the insides of our homes are a wild jungle of insects and microbes of which we are only very simplistically and often mistakenly aware. As Chris Henry was mentioning, modern medicine has been awash with new research showing how even our bodies are a thriving, wildly diverse, ever-changing ecosystem of bacteria and other microbes that are so deeply connected to us that they can even influence how we feel and what we think. But knowing that nature is literally everywhere, when I ask people where they think nature conservation happens, they usually conjure up images like this, or maybe this, or even this, thanks to some great documentaries and PR over the years. But here's an image that is much less frequently conjured, even though it needs to be. Ever heard of the term NIMBY? Not in my backyard? Next slide. Oh, we missed it. Anyway, so let's see. The term NIMBY, it comes up a lot in my field. It's usually used to deny the idea that nature should be in one's backyard, but whether we like it or not, it already is. And knowing that, we can exert intention over how those interactions happen and make them more positive. My specialty is human-wildlife interactions, those unexpected encounters between people and wildlife, and preventing negative encounters while encouraging positive ones is my bread and butter. Worried about coyotes in your neighborhood? Oh, the slides are out of order. Here's what you need to know about coyotes. If you have a small dog and you want to let it run around the yard unsupervised, make sure you have at least a 6-foot fence and keep cats inside. Statistically, indoor cats live longer, healthier lives for a variety of reasons. Don't want to get bitten by a venomous snake. I think we can go forward to our snake. There we go. If you don't want to get bitten by a venomous snake, know how to identify the snakes in your area. This right here is a copperhead. It is the one venomous species you're likely to come across in RTP. Notice the Hershey kiss pattern, chocolate brown on a lighter background. There you go. And even with copperheads, snakes only bite people in self-defense. So if you're aware of them and give them space, snakes are very happy to leave you alone. Don't want raccoons hanging around in your yard? I don't either. I would never put pet food outside. And as much as I love birds, my master's degree is in birds, by the way, I don't put bird feeders up. Bird feeders, oh, let me tell you, such a great idea on the surface. The birds get fed, you get to see them, win-win, right? Actually, bird feeders are one of the biggest causes of wildlife conflict. Raccoons and foxes and bears don't know it's not meant for them, and bird feeders can even cause direct harm to birds. For example, this past spring, we had an outbreak of salmonellosis across the eastern coast that killed large numbers of songbirds, and it was being spread at bird feeders. It's kind of like going to a buffet, but everyone's eating off of the same plate. After COVID, I think we can all understand why that's a bad idea. So this is what I'm getting at when I'm talking about knowledge and intention. What bugs me about the bird feeder issue is that this time of year, what birds really need more than anything else is insects, and they need lots of them. mostly caterpillars. But by a quirk of nature, most caterpillars can only live on the plants they evolved alongside, native plants. That butterfly bush in your yard that's originally from China, sure, it provides nectar for adult butterflies, but it's in effect a food desert for their caterpillars, and by extension, young birds. No baby birds, no adult birds. And the same is true for bird feeders. By planting native flowers, trees, and shrubs, we can reintroduce the natural foods and shelter that birds have been surviving and thriving on since long before we came along. And if you haven't read it, go check out Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home. He does an amazing job of explaining the importance of native plants. And go plant an oak tree in your yard, like yesterday. In the end, understanding our inescapable interconnectedness with nature gives us the power to improve the quality of our wildlife experiences and contribute to conservation in meaningful ways from the comfort of our own home. Oh, I got lost. We're gonna go, keep going. Sorry, I skipped the slide there. There we go. So I guess I'll leave you with a quote from Richard Louv, who is the author of The Last Child in the Woods. We cannot protect something we do not love. We cannot love what we do not know, and we cannot know what we do not see or hear or sense. And I'll add to that, even if it's under our noses in our own backyards. Thank you.
All right, some great stuff there from Falyn Owens. It is now time for your questions in Zoom chat, in Facebook Live. First question comes in from Holly on social media. If people want to turn their properties into something that is more supportive of the native habitat, aside from removing their bird feeders, what are the best resources to use to find native plants and other items that they could put in their yard instead of some of these imported ones?
Sure. This is a challenge that's getting easier over time because historically, not a lot of retailers that sell landscape plants really knew about native plants or their benefits. So over time, it's easier to find native plants. Retailers are labeling plants as native. There are landscapers who are starting to specialize in native plants. But to get started, one of the greatest resources I can recommend is NC Audubon's resources on plant-friendly birds. So if you just Google NC Audubon plants for birds, they have great resources that talk about where you can buy plants in your area that are native, which species of plants are most beneficial for different birds. It's a really excellent resource. There's also an NC Native Plant Society that you can join on Facebook that also has great resources.
All right, next question comes in from Catherine on Facebook chat. She notes that she loves Doug Tallamy's work. Her question is, do you see opportunities to connect yard rewilding with the 30 by 30 conservation objectives?
The 30 by 30 conservation objectives, I honestly, unfortunately, don't know what those are. So I can't really answer your question. I apologize.
Well, in that case, could you focus a little bit on rewilding of someone's yard?
Well, I would say removing or reducing the amount of lawn is a fantastic first place to start. Lawn can be great, especially if you use it for picnics or throwing catch with your kids. But large, expansive lawns are really an ecological desert. So where you have, corners of your yard that could be converted to trees or shrubs or wildflower gardens, go for it. Take that turf grass out and make a pollinator garden or plant a tree.
All right, last question is coming in from David on social media. In the event that someone in a suburban setting or even an urban setting has an encounter with wildlife that might be a bit disconcerting, what is the right way to handle that?
Right, that's a great question. And the last slide that I had mentioned the contact information for the Wildlife Helpline, which I was going to mention in a slide, but it's fine. There's an actual helpline that's run by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. There's a phone number, which is listed there, 866-318-2401. They also have an email, and you can go to our website, ncwildlife.org, and find information on how to call them or email them. And that is staffed by wildlife biologists who can answer all of your human-wildlife interaction questions. And especially if it's not an emergency situation, the best first thing to do is to just back up, step away, and contact a professional who can tell you what to do. Most of the time, doing nothing at first is the best solution.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Falyn Owens. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of RTP 180 for June 2021. Our subject was ecology. Hopefully you left a little smarter than you arrived. Coming up next month is RTP 180 for July of 2021. The subject is artificial intelligence. And guess what? It's our last virtual RTP 180. That's right. In August, we will be back right here in the Frontier in person for RTP 180. Don't know the topic, but the topic will be, hey, we're all in person again. The popcorn and beer is back. I know that's what I'm excited about. Ladies and gentlemen, please check us out at the Frontier co-working space. We are open. Please check out the box yard. It is also open. Find everything you need at rtp.org. On behalf of RTI International and Dual Boot Partners, I've been your announcer and MC and host, Wade Mentor, saying thanks for coming out. Please check us out online next month, and we will see you back at the Frontier in August. Good night, everybody.